Welcome to the Veterinary Rehabilitation Podcast, where we aim to help fellow veterinary rehab therapists increase their knowledge and elevate their practice. I'm Megan Kelly.
And I'm Anae Lloyd. Together, we bring you the latest insights, research, and information in the field of veterinary rehabilitation.
This podcast is brought to you by Onlinepethealth, a leading continuing education membership for veterinary rehabilitation therapists. With Onlinepethealth, you will have access to a wide range of online resources to help you stay up to date with the latest techniques, advances, and trends in the industry.
Our podcast features in-depth conversations with leading experts in veterinary rehabilitation. They share their own experiences and knowledge to help you improve your practice. Whether you're a seasoned pro or just starting out in the field, our goal is to provide you with the tools and the insights you need to succeed.
So join us as we explore the exciting world of veterinary rehabilitation and help you take your practice to the next level. Hey vet rehabbers, you can attend the Vet Rehab Summit from the comfort of your own home at your own pace. You can watch the lectures, participate in the discussions, and ask any questions that you want without having to worry about travel, childcare, or finding someone to manage your practice. The Vet Rehab Summit also is a great way to network with other veterinary rehabilitation professionals. You can connect with people from all over the world, share ideas, and learn from each other. So it's happening on the 10th and 11th of November this year. We're hosting our 7th Vet Rehab Summit. The topic is myofascial chains in equine and canines, and your lecturers for the 2 days, Wibke Elbrond and Rika Schultz. Now, Onlinepethealth paid members, you get complimentary VIP access to the Vet Rehab Summit. Non-members are able to purchase access to the event. We still have some early bird tickets available. You can go to vetrehabsummit.com and save yourself lots of dollars. So today I've chatted with Michael Bugg about the difficulties of qualifying and going straight into practice, how impostor syndrome and perfectionism can be good and bad at the same time, and that we are more than just our profession. But before I head over to this chat with Michael, I just want to say a very quick thank you to Lily Moffat from Lily Moffat Vet Physio. Thank you so much for the shout out about the Veterinary Rehabilitation Podcast on Instagram. Please email me at Megan@Onlinepethealth for your limited edition veterinary rehabilitation mug. And also a quick word from our sponsor. Paw Prosper believes true pet well-being demands a three-pronged approach: prevention, support, and rehabilitation. Their brands are trusted by veterinarians, universities, and rehab facilities alike. Whether you're looking to train, rehabilitate, or help your pet age gracefully, their brands like Help 'em Up Harness, Pitfalls, Muffin's Halo, and Response System offer effective, innovative, and proven solutions. Learn more about how Paw Prosper can help pets age gracefully today at pawprosper.com. You can also see Paw Prosper and their brands at this year's Vet Rehab Summit on the 10th and 11th of November. You guys are going to love this chat, so over to the chat with Michael. Hey, Michael, thank you so much for joining me.
Hey, Megan. Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome, Michael. I want to tell the listeners about yourself and how you became a veterinarian.
You bet. So I am joining everyone from Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, Canada. I grew up on a mixed farm. So over here, what that looks like would be, grain farm, but also beef cattle. And so I was the little boy that saw the veterinarian swoop in, at 3 a.m. to do the C-section on the cow, and would run out of my bed down to the barn and think, wow, this is really cool, right? As he would, swoop in there and save the day. That's kind of what piqued my interest in becoming a veterinarian. I mean, we had dogs, cats, cows, all the critters on the farm. Fast forward, go through veterinary school, graduate in 2008, went into mixed animal practice for a couple years, so that included horses and anything that could come through the door. After a couple years of that, I was getting a little bit maybe tired of the on-call and worried about how my body was going to hold up. I pivoted over to small animal medicine, which was just dogs and cats. And I did that for about another 8 years. So all clinical practice as an associate veterinarian. And eventually, a little guy named Miserable Mike started appearing. So that's my evil alter ego as I started to get a little bit jaded in the career. And I've actually pivoted over. I haven't clinically practiced. I'm trying to remember the date. I think since 2018. So it's been a few years. I now run a podcast to the veterinary community, and help talk a lot about living intentional and investing and that sort of thing.
Yeah, wow. I actually also haven't practiced since 2014.
Wowzers.
Yeah.
Yeah, the years, it goes fast. Like, I think I'm coming up on 5 years, and I was like, wow, it doesn't seem like that long.
Hey, do you ever like think about like you can put a catheter in to a vein, and if you had to do a spay, would you do it?
The spay, yes. The catheter would scare me more, to be honest. I don't know. I'll start with a really big one, a really big vein.
I actually had to, I think it was probably about 4 or 5 years ago. I had to put a catheter in. It was to a family member's dog. And I was actually okay. I actually got it in first go. I think it was just luck. But yeah, I don't know about the spay. Surgery was never my strong point. I didn't really enjoy doing surgery at all. I love consulting. I love seeing the people and talking to them. Yeah, I'd prefer to be out in the front rooms than in the back room doing all the surgery. So I don't know about that spay if I could do it, especially like a big fat Labrador. Nah.
Yeah. It's funny, spays are supposed to be quote unquote the easy surgery, but a big fat dog spay was just always consistently challenging, no matter how many you had in. But it's a tough one.
So Michael, you actually wrote a book, and I love the topic, the heading of the book. It's "You're Gonna Get Peed On." So tell us about, where did that come from? What made you write that book?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, the title always makes everyone laugh, and I mean, it's factual. If you're in the veterinary industry for any amount of time, you are going to get peed on. This book is really the book that I wish I had when I graduated in 2008. So really what it is all the stuff that we're not really taught in vet school, or at least we weren't, right? Things have changed a lot, in the last 15 years or so. So veterinary schools are now starting to talk about the various challenges that we face in the veterinary industry. Really, the goal of the book is to help veterinary professionals, keep their dream job from becoming a nightmare. And we keep hearing more and more stories of that, where, people after X number of years in the profession are, burnout is kind of a hot topic. And so really I go through all the various challenges that you may experience in your career and different tactics and personal growth strategies that I learned over the years to help, cope. Or I look at it more as adding skills like in your tool belt. So we graduate, we're very well equipped to do medicine and surgery, but it's all those other skills that we need to learn to develop to become a whole sort of complete veterinarian.
Yeah, so I actually got a copy of the book, and I am absolutely loving it. I haven't finished it yet. I was hoping to have finished it before our chat. But there are so many things in there that I could really resonate with. You mentioned, in the beginning, when your first day driving, you just felt like completely unprepared and you just had this horrible feeling. Share with us that experience. I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah. So there's sort of two things there. So the story you're referring to, for your listeners, this was literally my first day driving to the veterinary clinic as a veterinarian. So this was the veterinary clinic that I had volunteered at in high school. I had gone back and been a summer student there, but now I was driving there officially as a veterinarian. And I remember coming to a red light that morning and stopping, and it felt like the red light stretched on for hours. I was sort of gripping the steering wheel, and I had this overwhelming feeling of like, what the hell have I done? Right? And when I look back on that now, I look at goal setting, and I had always placed like an outcome-based goal of becoming a veterinarian, as I'm sure many of your listeners can relate to. And you finally achieve that, right? You write all the tests. Up here, we passed the NAVLE, the North American Veterinary Licensing Exam, and there you are, you're a veterinarian. And I was expecting like the classic, once I achieve this, I'll be happy, or I'll feel this way. And I'm driving to the vet clinic and I'm like, holy crap, like this isn't how I expected to feel. I felt more trapped, to be honest, because I was like, now I'm supposed to make this drive, to this veterinary clinic every day for the next 30 or 40 years, from 8:30 to 5:30 or whatever the hours may be. This is what I'm doing, right? So it felt like very trapping to me.
That's amazing. As you're saying the story, I actually had a very, very similar experience. So I graduated at the University of Pretoria and went to the UK. and I got a job on the Isle of Wight. And I can remember it wasn't on my first day. I had been at the practice maybe for 2 weeks, and I took my first weekend trip to the mainland. And I remember driving, I was on the train and just thinking, oh my gosh, this is my life, like what I'm been doing now. And it is this long. And I remember counting exactly the same, like 35, 40 years till I retire. And I'm going to have to, this is it. Like I have to keep working for the rest of my life, doing this. And then I must say it actually went away. And I actually just thought it's probably just like, first job jitters or something like that. But yeah, I had a very similar experience. I think that thing that you're talking about, whether you have the outcome, I mean, I think that is something that a lot of professionals have, right? And so I don't think this is unique to veterinarians. I think, a lot of the listeners are veterinary rehabilitation therapists, veterinary physiotherapists, vet nurses. They all have this dream to be what they're going to be. And then they get there and then they're like, now what? And for me, it was always, I actually thought, no, I haven't actually found my exact niche in veterinary, and I need to study more. And the more I study, then maybe I'll feel better, And I was always feeling like, I always felt like I wasn't good enough, like that I hated being a master of everything, like just doing a little bit of this and a little bit of that. I wanted to be like the best. And I think that's, in your book, you talk about the perfectionism. I think that is just a classic veterinarian type personality, right? To be the best. Always want to be the best at something. And I really struggled with that, and especially in those early days. And I remember just thinking it will get better. And after a few years, it didn't. It just didn't get better. I still had those feelings, feeling inadequate, feeling like there's always somebody better that should be treating this animal. And it's not the best thing for this animal for me to be treating them, because there's somebody a whole lot more clever or more equipped, had more knowledge, more qualified than me, and that animal would be better to be in that person's consult room.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, this is such a big topic. I have lots of thoughts, lots of places we can go on this. So the first thing I'll say on, perfectionism or imposter syndrome, tangent, I don't really love the term imposter syndrome, but whatever, we'll leave the nomenclature aside just to kick it around a bit. The first thing I'll say is I view it as a good thing, right? We have to stop for a second and think about this. Like, in a lot of ways, this sort of perfectionism and high performing traits is what has got us here, right? Like most veterinarians, we would not be here if we didn't hold ourselves to a very high standard, put in the work, and in sometimes even obsessive, like, well, I don't have this quite right yet, so I'm going to work until I get it better. And that serves us very, very well at getting to the point of climbing that mountain of being a doctor of veterinary medicine. And one of the things that I see, and sort of one of the catches, is the skills that got you here won't get you there. And so what I mean by that is we're really well positioned as we're, a student. We get into veterinary school, we get through year 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe we do an internship, maybe we do a residency, and going back to goal setting, all of those are outcome-based goals. And they're all just 1 year in front of us, right? Very manageable. We can see it, right? We can do almost anything for a year, right? It can be a really hard year. We can be putting in huge hours. We can be studying like crazy, very unbalanced, not sleeping well, maybe not eating well, not exercising. Doesn't matter. We can get through that 1 year. But then, as we've talked about, when you hit that final, mountain, and it's like, okay, now you're a veterinarian, and we're used to and we're trained to sprint, right? High performer, sprint through, get to the next test, get to the next thing. Then that timeline expands, like we've talked about, where all of a sudden the next outcome is retirement 30 or 40 years away. You can't sprint that long, right? Like, you will burn out. So if we take the exact same skill set and the exact same approach that got us to this point and we apply it to our life, we're destined to fail ultimately, right? And that's where, we can talk about peak performance versus optimal performance. when we're going through vet school, we're aiming for peak performance on, test day or on, surgery day when we're doing that clinical practicum. But in practice, we're really looking for optimal performance where, we can do it sort of day after day without burning ourselves out. So that'd be kind of the first thing I look at is perfectionism is good in a small dose, but the skills that got us here won't get us there. So that's where we have to learn to tame that down, tame that imposter syndrome down. And when we look at imposter syndrome, it's really just a feeling, right? Like when all these thoughts are racing through our head over whatever it is that we're feeling like an imposter over, we have to take a step back and think, is this evidence or emotion? Is this me just being emotional and telling myself a story that's not true? Or is the evidence actually there that supports, okay, you need more practice in that area, right? So that's some of how I sort of set that up and look at it.
Yeah, I love that because often there is evidence, right? So sometimes if there is the case where you identify a knowledge gap and you're like, right, there's a reason I'm feeling this way. And it is because I need to upskill or I need to improve my knowledge and I've got a knowledge gap there. And then it's okay because then you're like, right, you identify it and now I can do something about it. It's the other side when you're actually just making up things. Those are the ones I think are really destructive because then, when you're emotional, that logical side of your brain doesn't come in, to think about, oh, is this a knowledge gap? You're just emotional, right? And then you just spiral down that horrible imposter. Somebody said, actually, I had someone on my podcast and they also said they don't like to label it as a syndrome. So they called it imposter moments, which I thought was really cool. So we've got maybe 2 or 3 podcasts on imposter syndrome /moments. Yeah, I think that's really what it is. It's a moment in time because it's not all the time. You feel that something will happen. Somebody will say something or you'll doubt yourself or you'll come back and there'll be a patient that you operated on and the surgery's failed or something. And that's when those moments creep in.
Yeah. And it always brings me back to, say, writing a test in veterinary school, and we don't remember the 90% of the answers that have nothing written beside them, but we do remember the one that has the big red circle beside it, right? And that, again, that's just a moment. That was one question in time. And as veterinarians, we tend to hold on to that. So like you said, here's an imposter moment, and there's hundreds, thousands of moments in a day, but that's the one at the end of the day we sit there and hold on to, right? So even though it only happened once, we replay it over and over and over, effectively making it happen thousands of times in our head, right? And that's where it can kind of be dangerous, like the spiraling you alluded to.
Yeah, making the problem seem a whole lot more than it actually is.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there was something that you said in your book, which I absolutely loved because it really just made me think about a whole lot of things that happened in my life. It was frustration exists when there is a gap between expectation and reality. And, as a young child, I grew up around horses and always wanted to be a horse vet. And I wanted to be a vet from the time, as first time I can remember, I wanted to be a vet. Also loved dogs and animals and, and I had this idea of what veterinary was. And then I went and did veterinary nursing. And the strange thing is actually I got an idea already of what it was when I did veterinary nursing. And it wasn't exactly how I thought it was. But then I still carried on and I still did veterinary after that. Probably because that was all I'd ever thought about. That was what I was going to do. And I was told actually when I was about 14 or so that I wasn't clever enough to be a vet. And so I was sort of guided in a different path. And that's why I ended up doing the veterinary nursing. And so when I did the veterinary nursing, there was a professor that I met. His name was Prof. Berry. And I actually was able to, at the WSAABA conference, and I think it was like 2010, he lectured there. And I had the opportunity to go up to him and thank him because he said to me one day as a vet nurse, he said, "You should be a vet," he said to me. And he said, "Have you ever thought about being a vet?" And so I told him my whole sob story and how that I wasn't clever enough. And he said, "You are clever enough and you should do it." And off I went and I did it. And yeah, so I knew exactly what veterinary was about, yet I still carried on and did it. And I just think about my parents and my friends and all of them, what they think about what we do on a daily basis, and have absolutely no idea how hard it is to be a veterinarian. They have this idea of us playing with puppies and being there when the cesarean happens, and being there for the birth of a foal or a cow or a calf, all those exciting things, which, as we all know, there's also the anal glands and the abscesses and all those other delightful things that we also have to approach. So I'd love to know your take on that. I mean, it really is exactly that, and you say the space between those two is what trips us young vets when we first qualify up. So let's expand on that a little bit.
Yeah. Well, in my opinion, it really comes down to perspective, right? So I mentioned the story as a little boy seeing the vet swoop in. That was the perspective of the little boy, with the very romanticized version of veterinary medicine. Another perspective of the exact same situation would have been from that veterinarian, where it's 3 a.m. Okay, he's now 45 minutes away from the clinic. I didn't even think about the fact that, he's got to drive back, put the instruments away, or maybe he leaves those for the next day, whatever, go home. It's 4:30 in the morning, get a tiny little bit of sleep. Maybe they had other calls even. I don't know. Be back at the vet clinic at 8 a.m. None of that was inside of my perspective at that moment in time. I was viewing it only from one lens, right? And even listening to your story, you were given two very different perspectives. One is you are not clever enough, and the other is you are clever enough, right? And it's really what story do we want to pick up? One of my favorite, sayings or quotes is, we become what we think about most of the time, right? And so tying this back even into our discussion on imposter syndrome, if we take that one moment in time and now we replay it over and over in our head, most of the time that's what we're thinking about, and we will become that, right? So for you, fortunately, you had this one gentleman come along and give you a new perspective that said, hey, you are clever enough, and you chose to accept that and then listen to that most of the time, and fast forward and here you are, you're a veterinarian, right? But so whatever story we want to tell ourselves, inside of there, there's going to be gaps of what we're telling ourselves as a story and then where reality plays out. And for me anyway, I found that was a big source of frustration, right? You would think, okay, I'm going into this profession and my life is going to look like this. And then all of a sudden you're in it and it's not quite how I expected. And that's causing a lot of frustration. And really it was a lack of perspective, right? That's kind of how I view it. And you can see that, even in relationships. Let's take a veterinarian with their client. And we always have to try to remember how is our client experiencing this situation? And usually it's through a lack of communication where, perspectives may start to widen. They're expecting one thing, but we have way more experience, right? So we may have uncommunicated thoughts going through our head of how we think this case is playing out, but there's a gap there, right? And that gap wasn't communicated, the perspective wasn't closed, and then that's where frustration will often arise. So, this happens in all different areas of life.
Yeah, so true. That communication and clients' expectations, we can always get into trouble with that. So tell us about what happened when, you were then, 10, 12 years you've been consulting. What are the changes that happened for you sort of emotionally? And what were you thinking? Like, how am I going to change this? What am I going to do?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's a hard one to answer because it was very drawn out, right? So the best way I can describe it is, we all have, it starts with a moment in the veterinary clinic that's frustrating, and then, enough of those moments happen in a day, we come home and it's like, that was a bad day, right? And you string enough bad days together and all of a sudden, that was a bad week, right? And then all of a sudden, you're in a bad mood, right? And that's something, you're at the vet clinic, you take that home with you. And I like to think anyway, I'm more of an easygoing, happy-go-lucky guy. That's, how I kind of approach life. And I found myself all of a sudden, but slowly, having more of these bad days. And then it kind of dawned on me where it's like, you're not just in a bad mood anymore. This is your new personality, because most of the time, this is how you're behaving, right? And it wasn't until it was conversation with my wife where, she kind of looked at me and said, you're miserable, Mike. And I had kind of joked about that, side moniker or my alter ego. And it was when that was sort of born that I was able to like stop and look at it and be like, you know what? Like, she's right. Most of the time, I am miserable Mike, right? So it's sort of that bad day turns into your new normal personality. And that's when I knew, okay, things really need to change, right? I have to get very intentional about how I'm showing up, because that's not who I want it to be.
So what advice do you give to those vet professionals that are out there that are feeling like this? They're feeling like, I've studied this, I'm not loving what I'm doing right now. And like you say, sometimes it's moments, something happens. And sometimes you can have that, for a period of time, and then suddenly you're okay again. And I remember having that, it would depend on maybe the team members that you're working with, maybe the area that you're in, the type of clients you're dealing with. They were all things that, impacted on how we practice and whether we were enjoying it or not. So if you're in a situation right now and things are not great and you're feeling like, there are more bad days than good days, what advice would you give those professionals?
Yeah. The first thing I would say is, and sometimes this can be kind of hard to hear when you're in it. It can be very easy to start pointing at other things, right? And be like, okay, this is happening because I'm in a toxic work environment or whatever it is. The first thing I would say is, you are 100% responsible for your life, right? And I'll say that, and I do recognize absolutely things happen. There are things that happen that are totally out of our control. I get that. But you have to just approach it from the frame of, I'm 100% responsible. Like, I get to create my life. I get to choose, right? So that allows you sort of the opportunity to assess everything and line up and look at, okay, what do I want my life to look like, right? Like, dream a little bit. What would an ideal day look like? And it doesn't mean, just because you had one bad day, you burn everything down and start over, right? Let's be methodical here and approach it. But if you can look and see areas in your life, in your day, in your clinical practice that are just constantly out of alignment, I mean, there's really two steps to it: is removing those things that are causing a bunch of resistance, right? They're not in alignment with you, with your core values. Get rid of those and do more of what is in alignment. Now, this is the easiest thing in the world to say and the hardest to do, right? So I know there's listeners probably listening to this and be like, yeah, okay. And there's a saying, if you do what is easy, your life will be hard. And if you do what is hard, your life will be easy, right? So it's very easy to go through the day and just accept all the things that are out of alignment and not have any difficult conversations and not have any conflict to rearrange your life. It is very hard to lean into those conversations. But if you do that, right, and this is, again, closing that gap. It's easy to let that gap just keep widening and widening because you never have to face it, right? But if you can lean into it and start to close that gap over the long term, your life will be easier because you'll be doing things that are more in alignment.
Yeah, and if you don't, what are the consequences? I mean, we have at the moment now veterinary professionals. I'm not sure if we're the highest, but I think we're very close to the highest suicide rates in all professions, right? We have people that, have burnout, passion fatigue. So we've got to listen, right? When we're having those feelings, we got to listen. We've got to listen to what's happening and change it. And if we don't, we could end up that way.
Yeah. And it is, I mean, certainly, we're well-versed in the veterinary profession. It does go beyond us, like all healthcare providers, and even outside of healthcare, lots of people are feeling this way, and I look at sort of the pace of the modern world. I look at social media, and we're constantly fed things that we should be, right? Or external goals or ideals that we should strive towards. And, I think we need to stop and really look at like, okay, well, what fills my cup, right? That you alluded to it, talking about various people in your life. And even before we hit recording, both of us stepping away from clinical practice, you get various voices, telling you, well, you shouldn't do that.
Yeah.
Right. I wouldn't do that. You're just going to give up on that. Like, everyone wants to vie for our attention and tell us what they should do. It's no different. Whoever that person was that told you you're not clever enough, all they were really telling you was they feel like they aren't clever enough. So they're going to put that onto you, So I really think part of this sort of digging out in the veterinary profession is individuals having to start, getting really clear on what they want and then starting to move towards that instead of just doing what everyone else has always done or tells them they should do.
Yeah, and I think there is this perception, and I think it's more just in the professional areas, and maybe it's medical professionals, that when you become a veterinarian or when you become a doctor, that's what you are, right? And I remember it was 2014 and I was pregnant with my second child. And at the first pregnancy, so 3 years before I had given birth to my first daughter. And those 3 years, I must say, were really hard for me. I went to work before she woke up, and she must have been at that stage, like maybe 6 months. I recall like 3 or 4 days. Coming home, she was sleeping. I looked at her in her cot. Went the next morning, I didn't see my daughter for 3 days. I saw her sleeping, but she didn't see me awake. And I remember saying to my husband, no, this is not the mom that I want to be at all. And I said, if I have to make a decision at the end of my life, was I a good vet or was I a good mom? It would be a good mom, hands down. And I am not the mom that I want to be now. And so no judgment to anybody that works those hours and isn't able to. But just for me, that wasn't how I wanted to be a mom. I wanted to be present. I wanted to fetch my kids from school. I wanted to be able to go to all these sports events. And so I made a decision that I can't carry on like that. And so I decided to actually take a sabbatical from practicing. So in my mind, I was always going to come back. It was only going to be for a few years. And I took a sabbatical and thought, while I have my second child, when she's maybe 2, then I will go back to practice. And I remember making that decision to take the sabbatical, and I got a lot of pushback. Obviously, from my clients. My clients were so unhappy, and I had to do a transition phase of 6 months where some of my very, very close clients that I had for a long time, I had to go do some house visits while I was pregnant, sitting on the floor treating pets. And I got pushback from friends and from family. And I remember them saying, they'd obviously experienced me going through all the years of study. It took me 8 years to become a veterinarian, 2 years of vet nursing, and then 6 years of veterinary. And then I went to the University of Tennessee and did my CCRP. So I studied a lot. And they were like, you can't just throw that all away. And I remember saying, but I'm not throwing all that away. And I don't regret it. It's the best thing that I ever did. I don't regret studying it. I'm going to do something different with, now. And I'll go back, I'm just going to find something where I can use my profession to generate income. And I will go back to consulting when I'm ready, when it's the right time for my family. And it might be when they're a little bit older. And, that was really, really hard for me because I remember actually second guessing myself. And people saying to me, if you take this sabbatical, you're going to lose your skills so quickly. You'll never be able to go back to be a vet. And I had the worries, I thought, whoa, what happens if that's the case? What happens if I'm never the vet that I was, especially with all my perfectionisms and all my worries about being absolutely perfect and to be the best, that's not going to be okay for me. Yeah, and then I obviously also had all the friends, that said, you are so lucky that you're a vet. I've always wanted to be a vet and I never got into vet school. I tried and you can't throw this away, like carry on. And yeah, so it was really difficult for me, really difficult. And I had to really listen to what I needed, not what everyone else needed, because if I had stayed on and carried on in my practice, it wouldn't have been for me or for my family. It would have been because of everyone else and how they were judging me for, taking a break. But then obviously what happened is I didn't end up going back, but I use my veterinary degree every single day in what I do. So I still use my veterinary. I still feel I'm a part of it. I feel like now I help animals in a very different way, and I'm not limited by my time. Before I could only treat as many animals that I could in the space of time I was consulting with my hands. And now I treat thousands of animals through the hands of all the therapists that learn and grow on my platform. So yeah, it's just different. But it's hard. It's hard making that change. And yeah, you think that, once you're a veterinarian for life. That's it. People have that sort of thought process, but you don't have to be. You can do something, and you could even do something completely different. Who says you can't be a vet for 15 years and then decide to do something different?
Yeah, I like that story. Thanks for sharing that. It's interesting, the identity piece, right? I talk a little bit about like the words that follow I am follow you. So for a lot of listeners, it's I am a veterinarian, right? And that may be true, but that doesn't have to be complete, right? There can be many other things. I am a mom, I am a dad, I'm a, partner, all these different things. And I do see that a lot, where sometimes that gets so focused, where it's just, I am a veterinarian, and that is it. And it becomes all encompassing and totally consumes a person. And, and like you said, it's just not possible, right? To have all these other things. You looked at it and said, I want to be a better mom than I am right now, right? And made a choice. So the things that really jumped out for me was, number one, just awareness, to have that conversation with yourself. And then number two, to make a decision, because you did decide in the face of a bunch of people telling you, various things, but you were like, no, this is what's best for me and my family. I'm making this decision, and you can always adjust. Doesn't mean it's forever, like you said. So yeah, I commend you. Good
Thank
job.
you. Yeah, it was scary, I will say. Because at that time I had my own practice. So I tried to sell the practice and I couldn't, because I was the practice. So I was the sole veterinarian. And so I literally just closed it down, gave away my clients to anyone who I would trust. So I was very lucky. There were 2 practices that were close by, and I was able to pass my clients over to them. That probably would have been the reason that I stayed and didn't do it. I think if I hadn't had someone to pass my clients over to, I don't know if I would have done it. I would have probably just carried on doing it until I could. That was a big thing for me, that my clients and my patients were going to be looked after from somebody that I could trust.
Wow. To me, that makes it even more incredible, that you had a business venture attached to it too. And you still were like, this decision is so important to me that whatever, I can't sell it, I'll just close it down.
When I talk about it now, I think to myself, was I crazy? What did I do that for? No, but in hindsight, it was still the right decision. Like, I wouldn't change it. I wouldn't change it. It would have been really great, obviously, to have sold the business, but it wasn't to be. So
it's amazing. So we were chatting. I also co-host a podcast, and we interview various veterinary professionals, and I can't tell you the number of times when we're chatting with someone about whatever they're up to now, and in their story, there's this distinct pivot moment, where they were like, we were doing this and it wasn't quite working, and we had a really tough decision to make, and we made this decision, and then from that point forward, their life, their business, their life, their personal life, everything, exponentially gets better. And it always comes down to this crux of, this was a really difficult decision to make, but we made it and we pivoted in this direction and we've never looked back.
Yeah. So tell us about your podcast. So for those of the listeners that might be interested in listening to, it's called the Veterinary Project Podcast, right?
Yeah, you bet. So I co-host it. So the Veterinary Project Podcast, we're we're worldwide, I guess. We're based in Canada, so a lot of Canadian and American influence. We're trying to branch out, into other countries as well. But we basically talk about everything that is not medicine and surgery, right? So we're not a CE podcast per se. It is all about personal growth and business and all the stuff we likely weren't taught in veterinary school, right? So all of those other skills and tools that you need to have, that successful career, successful life in the veterinary profession. So certainly we do focus more so on veterinarians, but it is for the whole profession, right? We have vet techs on, various other experts, right, that aren't even in the veterinary field, but can relate back to. So it really is, I guess I'll call it sort of a passion project of me and Jonathan, the co-host. And we were just looking at it, like, and all the things I talk about in the book, as I started chatting with more vets, I was like, so many people feel this way. And we just felt compelled to start having those conversations and putting them out there, and I feel like everyone really learns from that collective, and shared stories of others.
Awesome. And for the listeners, I'll put the link to that podcast in the show notes. And then where can our vet rehab therapists get hold of you going to get peed on?
Yeah, it's available online at sort of all the major, outlets, Amazon, whatnot. Also, you can check out our podcast website, theveterinaryproject.com. There is a page on there devoted to the book with an order link. It just diverts you back over to Amazon, but online, that's the best place to look for it.
Awesome. Michael, it's been so great chatting to you. Thank you so much. I've really actually have sort of gone back in time, and you've just brought up a whole lot of emotions and memories for me, but all good ones.
Thanks so much for having me, Megan.
Awesome. Take care, Michael. Bye-bye. If you enjoyed this podcast, please hit the subscribe button so you get notified every time I load a new podcast. I'm here every week talking to vet rehab therapists from all over the world about all things vet rehab. A big thanks to our sponsor, Paw Prosper. Their sponsorship allows us to be able to give this podcast to you for free. Please go and check them out. You can go to pawprosper.com. Don't forget to bookmark the next Vet Rehab Summit. It's on Friday the 10th and Saturday the 11th of November. Come and be a part of the world's largest online veterinary rehabilitation conference. It's created specifically for you, the vet rehabber community. Onlinepethealth members, you get VIP complimentary access to the Vet Rehab Summit. For more information and continuing education for vet rehabbers, you can go to onlinepethealth.com.